Well, when you call for an ambulance in an emergency, you can expect it to come with everything needed to save your life.
But one vital element is often missing: whole blood. Now a group of former combat medics is working to change that.
Only on KAKE News investigator Pilar Pedraza shows us change is coming to Kansas.
The difference is time. When it comes to a life-threatening injury, time is your biggest asset. In trauma, you're looking at something called the golden hour.
The importance of time in saving lives is something Amy Wagner is intimately familiar with as a flight nurse with LifeSave Kansas Air Ambulance Service. Based in Wichita, she can find herself anywhere from Phoenix to Denver at a moment's notice.
For traumatic injuries, GI bleeding, or postpartum hemorrhage.
Among the tools she has to save lives, whole blood. It's something only a handful of ambulance services across the country stock.
What was your personal reaction when you found out that your company was going to start carrying whole blood?
I thought it was fantastic. Our hope is that eventually everyone will.
You see one patient who's pale, in shock, they're sweaty. I mean, they're going to die in the next 15 minutes, and you plug an IV with blood into them in the pre-hospital on the ambulance, and they pink up. They'll start talking to you. And their blood pressure rises. You don't need many of those before you're a believer.
Dr. John Holcomb first noticed the difference whole blood can make during his 23 years as an Army surgeon, caring for combat casualties on battlefields from Somalia to Iraq and Afghanistan.
It became very clear that bleeding is a really big deal, and stopping bleeding is a big deal. And once you stop bleeding, by whatever means, then we need to fill the patient back up.
After he retired from the Army, Holcomb and fellow veterans started the Pre-Hospital Blood Transfusion Initiative Coalition. Sometimes referring to themselves as the Whole Blood Mafia, they push for change at the civilian level because right now, the vast majority of ambulances only carry a clear fluid called crystalloid.
The clear bags that you see hanging on the TV shows, that's bad for patients that are bleeding. That is a data-driven comment. It's not a question, it's not opinion. Patients don't do well when that's what is done.
It's a change Dr. Brian Beaver believes in fully.
I've seen the benefit from it firsthand.
A Kansas kid, he saw what whole blood on ambulances could do while working in North Carolina, like a motorcycle accident patient who survived.
If they hadn't been able to give that whole blood, there's a very good chance that patient would never have even made it to the operating room.
Back in KC, he got HealthStar Air Ambulance to begin carrying whole blood last summer, a first for the region. Now with the University of Kansas Health Systems, he's working to get ground ambulances in Johnson County to join the movement.
We do not currently use whole blood. No one in the Kansas City region is currently using whole blood.
Do you know why that is?
I think it's just been a matter of historically the logistics and the cost.
The cost of the special training in handling and administering the blood, as well as storing it.
To make sure that we're following all the protocols that would be followed in the hospital blood bank.
Maintaining the safety of the blood and keeping it at a cold temperature.
At LifeSave Kansas in Wichita, the blood refrigerator has backups to the backups of thermometers to make sure the blood doesn't go bad.
If we get called on a mission, we put it in our cooler here that can stay cool for hours and is also monitored for the temperature.
Then they've got to warm it up before giving it to a patient.
So we have a warming system that we use. Giving cold blood to a patient could be fatal.
And of course, there's just getting a hold of the whole blood in the first place.
I think the biggest struggle is the logistics of it. It takes a lot of logistics to be able to coordinate between the blood banks, the EMS systems, the hospital systems.
Even as the need for blood is increasing, donations are falling. Earlier this year, the American Red Cross announced that its donations had dropped 40% since the early 2000s, leaving supplies at record lows, and those who support carrying blood on ambulances in search of new donors.
There have been places in the country that have developed known donor registries for patients that have the type of blood we need to do whole blood. And so even EMS and fire departments themselves will recruit their own people to donate blood so that they can keep those blood stocks stored.
Because carrying whole blood to those in the field who need it most saves lives. Over the last 5 years, multiple studies have shown getting whole blood to patients while they're still on the scene bleeding out increases their chances of living at least another 30 days by as much as 48%.
To date, about 160 different ambulance services around the country have added whole blood to their supplies, and that's including a 30% increase in just the last month. But it's out of more than 23,000 licensed EMS agencies nationwide.
I'm optimistic that by next year we'll be carrying whole blood, at least on some ground EMS units in the city.
And Sedgwick County EMS medical director says they're also now in the early stages of discussing how to stock whole blood.
You do not want to be last right here. You don't want to be last. You're not going to be first, but you don't want to be last.
Still ahead, with a blood shortage, how do emergency crews make sure they're not wasting this precious resource while waiting for a trauma call? Pilar will join us to answer that question and others about how crews make sure they get the blood on board.